All right, I've got that Grizzly walker built up that I showed a few weeks back. This is from Conflict 47, a what if kind of World War II scenario. What if World War II had gone on and various new technologies had been introduced, things like that. The assembly was not difficult. And by the way, you're going to hear kind of a subset of this in the video about this model. I'm just expanding on it for patrons to talk a little more about essentially assembling resin kits. But the fit was pretty good. There's this part right here is one single part, and that had to go on this. And the fit back here, there was quite a bit of need for sanding. I just used a file, and all I did was sand it back there and just sanded it here and there and kept test fitting it until I got it on there in an acceptable fit, because I knew that I could fill, there was some gaps right back here, up in there, and right along here, but I knew I could fill those with Mr. Surfacer just to cover up the blank of it. But for the most part, I got it to where it fit flush. And then when I glued it, I just held it on there really tight. I used a good bit of super glue on this because, of course, it's resin. But I also used super glue accelerator so that I could get it clamped in place, get it exactly where I wanted, and touch that accelerator to it, and it would stay where it was. So that worked out well. On these upper hatches, they were a little big for the opening, and so they were sitting right on top, and I wanted them to be a little more flush. So what I did was I used my knife to just kind of scrape out the inner edge of it and get those sitting a little better. This one's still just a little proud of it, but I'm not too worried about it because it's not going to be as noticeable as it was before. The main thing I looked for was for these hinges, which are part of the metal part, to fit into the slots that corresponded on the resin part. So that worked out pretty well. This mantlet cover is just glued in. It fit in there pretty close to perfect. I had to do a little bit of carving on the metal part here. The barrel was bent. I had to straighten it out. It was just bent a little, but I had to straighten it out. And then there's a seam line on it that you have to sand out and carve out and cut out to get rid of. Cleanup on the legs and the arms was fairly simple. There were some areas like on top of these shoulders here, there were some nubs, where it was the casting plug was up there, and I clipped that off and then just began sanding it until I got it fairly smooth. I think I discovered a hole there that I need to go fill up with some super glue, but that won't be a problem to do that. Anytime you're working with resin, if there's a little hole, put a dot of super glue in there, let that dry, sand it off, and you're good to go. Now, what I was concerned about was all of the joints have a nice little, little plug, a little point here where you mount it on, and then a corresponding hole in the arm where that goes. Now, generally that's going to be strong, at least strong enough to be able to glue the arm on. But even though super glue does generally a good job of bonding it, if you have an arm on and it gets like hit, it falls over, say, and hits like that, that shock impact is not always the best thing when it comes to super glue. And over time, super glue can dry up and crack, and over a long period of time, parts can start falling off. I've seen it happen on older models that I still have around or had around. It just begins to change its properties, I guess, as it dries. So what I try to do with any resin parts where possible is drill out a hole and put a corresponding hole in the other part and put a piece of wire. Now here I just used some copper wire, so it's a little bit soft and allows a little bit of flexibility. But I drill the hole out, and I drill it pretty deep. I try to drill the holes when I'm working with a resin kit so that it's far deeper than I need the wire to be. so that I don't have to sit there and try and keep clipping the wire down and clipping the wire down. But then I drilled it into the arm. Well, I first drilled it into the arm and stuck the wire in there and hit it with some accelerator to speed up the drying of the super glue. Then this part here was actually rounded off, and it's really hard to drill a hole into a rounded off surface. So I took my file and just filed it so that it's just a little bit flat right along there, and then I drilled the hole in, and I drilled it really deep, and then I just lined this up, and I can fit that right over it. Now, sometimes it can be hard to get the holes lined up. So one of the things I do is I'll start to put it on there, and I'll use the end of the wire to kind of mark where I need the hole to be. Another thing I'll do is I'll drill the hole a little wider than the wire itself so that there's a little bit of play, so that if I know I'm going to be close, which is what I did here, I eyeballed this. I knew I was going to be close, so I just kind of drilled it, used a slightly bigger drill bit, and it gave me enough play that I can get that in there. So I think it's important to always pin the parts before you glue them together. I did the same on the legs. It was a little tougher here because you have to get this waist section level so that when this part goes on top, that it sits level and it's not tilted too far down or too far back. So what I actually did was I set it on the base, and I temporarily glued 1 foot in place. You can see the glue mark there. I temporarily glued 1 foot in place. I had the wires and the holes all prepared, and I put that on there. Then I slid the other leg on, and I held them together so they would be tight, and I adjusted this so that it was sitting at exactly the right angle that I wanted. And then I took a piece of wire, and I held that wire with some tweezers, and I took my thin super glue and I just squeezed out a drop and let it run down the wire. And what it did was it ran around the circumference of the leg join there, and then I was able to pull that away and touch a drop of super glue accelerator, so it glued that. Now I can, once you have that glued on, then you can go back in and reinforce it if you need to with thick super glue. You can see that there's quite a bit down there on the bottom. I may need to carve that back just so it doesn't show so much. But those are glued in there fairly solid, and that thin super glue will run into all the gaps. That stuff is really runny. So that made sure that these held together nicely, although I'm not going to test it too much. They feel solid, so I'm going to leave them. This one I drilled in the wire here, and then I essentially just lined it up and kind of twisted it back and forth like that, which let me know where the hole needed to be drilled. And then I drilled the hole, and it was just the slightest bit off. So all I had to do was just take my X-Acto knife and just burrow the hole out a little bit. And now I can fit this right down on there. I have to kind of wiggle it around to get it lined up. But once I get it lined up, it fits right on there. Wouldn't you know it, I can't do it on camera. There it goes. But it just lines right up, and that thing sits on there, and I can glue that together at the end, and it'll sit. Once I hold it, it'll sit properly. Whoops, I guess I didn't get it. I guess I bent the wire. That's all right. I can figure that out later. Trust me, it does fit. I've had it work before. But I'm going to leave it in these parts to build it and paint it, so that it'll make it easier. And then towards the end, just bring the arms on here and add this on top of here without bending the wire, and set the whole thing on top of the base. But it's a pretty cool little model. You just got to pay attention to details as you're assembling it.